Hi, my name is Rich Schmidt. I'm here with Sery. We're at Westmount / Highland / Northwest Wine Company in Dundee. It's April 15th, 2021, and thank you so much for joining us today.
You're welcome.
First question, and most important question for you is why wine?
It was somewhat of a given. Not that it didn't just happen, but my parents were just passionate about wine. My dad started going in Burgundy when he was 17. And as soon as I was born, they just took me and my brother just to Burgundy. And at 5 years old, I was just already just roaming through the cellars, just while they were doing wine tasting. And it was always just like, if we were just nice and behaving during wine tasting, they would take us just have an ice cream after or just do something for us, because we had a mandatory wine tasting every day at some point during our holidays. So that was every summer in Burgundy growing up. Because I was born and grew up in a small French island in the Indian Ocean. So not on mainland France, and going to Burgundy was just a big event every year.
So let's talk about growing up. You were born in?
Réunion Island.
Okay, and tell me about kind of growing up there and about life there before you got into wine.
Before going to wine,
real, yes.
It was great. It was just a tropical island, so imagine Hawaii. It's very similar to Hawaii, so I've been told. Beach and just warm weather, tropical fruit, just sunny all the time, warm all the time, lots of rain. So very different from just my first winter in Burgundy was when I went to college. That was rough. That was the hardest thing. Not missing my parents was one thing, but just seeing the gray sky for days and weeks and months, it was just very hard.
So you mentioned growing up around wine. Tell me about that. And was it always something you thought you would do professionally?
No, just when I was just little, I wanted to be a baker, and and that's still just what my parents were encouraging me to do, just like whatever I wanted to do, and just I've been passionate about baking and pastry and all that. But then in summer of 1999, I was just 14, and I ended up just helping a friend of my parents just working in a vineyard, because I had some time, they needed some help just to go and do some green pass in the vineyard, and just I spent a week maybe just working there. And after that, I was like, okay, working in a vineyard is awesome. I just want to do that. And I was in middle school at the time, and that's just when I just started just to tailor my education just to go and go into winemaking eventually.
So tell me about that. Tell me about tailoring your education that way.
So there's several options in France. If you want to go into winemaking, vineyard managing, you can start at 16 in high school, which was not a possibility for me, because living in the island, we didn't have a winemaking school at the time. Well, still not really. Or just doing a study after high school. So that was just going to be after high school no matter what. But my parents wanted just me to go as far as possible in education, so just to aim for engineering first and then just do winemaking at the same time. And it just so happened that there is just an engineering degree that is just also specialized in vineyard management and winemaking. So I did a prep school first in Dijon, and then just went to Bordeaux in that engineering school, and did in parallel just a winemaking degree there.
I'm curious what's involved in that, and what about that was most intriguing to you? What part of the wine process was exciting to you?
So funnily enough, I didn't think I was making wine was not my goal. Growing grapes was my goal. I've always been an outdoor person, just gardening, being outside, just seeing, growing things was something that I've always just found fascinating. My dad would just always just show me how to multiply plants, divide, just take cuttings. Would always be in our neighbors oh, I like that plant. My mom was like, well, can we have little cuttings, and we'll just do. And that's all I just saw them just doing growing up. So growing things was always my passion. And then just understanding, just after working that first summer in the vineyard, understanding how complicated and just hard it was to grow the perfect grape, and how much effort went into just getting that perfect grape was just what I went after. Just making wine, just growing these grapes, it takes at least 8 to 10 passes per vine to end up just getting the grapes that we want at the end of the season. So you get to touch individual vines 8 to 10 times every year. There's so much detail just to it that I found that just fascinating. And I never thought about just how repetitive that would be, how hard that would be. It was just during the summer. Everything is wonderful during the summer. But that being said, just after that, I started working in the vineyard every year, and it's hard. The first few days are heartbreaking because the vineyards in Burgundy are a little lower than here, so it's 1 foot off the ground. You bend over, and I'm not particularly tall, but I'm not small either, so you just bend over just for your whole day, and just you keep squatting up and down. Like my legs were killed, my back was killed, and I was 14, 15, so not even that old. But then I just like just the how physical it was, and how just soothing it was, just to repeat things one after the other. And each vine is different, so you get to think every time. It's not just like you're not mechanically just doing the same thing. You're not a machine. You just see how the plant is, and you just quickly assess it and just do what you have to do in each vine. And that was just very interesting for me.
Tell me about that process of you mentioned it's not like mechanical in terms of just doing the same thing over and over. Tell me about getting to know the vines in that way and getting to learn what each one needed.
It took a while. I had just that friend of my parents who was just teaching me. She was a nurse, and at the same time she was the one just doing all the vineyard work at her husband's estate. And she was older at the time. Like she was probably in her late 50s, in 1999. She was just not young, but every day she would just go in the vineyard. She would just go see her patient, because she was that kind of nurse in France that just does visit in the morning, visit in the evening, go see her patient, come back. I would just meet her in the vineyard. We'd just work all day. She would just fix lunch, which is like always a big spread for lunch. And then just go back in the afternoon, and she would just go and see her patient. And so she taught me everything about just working in the vineyard, and in a very non-scientific way, really, because she had learned from her husband, who had learned from his father, who had learned from his grandfather. So that was just a lot of observation, just knowing, having done that for 45 years, just knowing exactly how to tailor that vine, but in a very empirical way, which I found fascinating, because I have a deep respect for science, and I love just like the scientific part of just growing anything or making wine, but I also just find it fascinating when people just manage just to have that knowledge without knowing the science, and just by observation, and just having worked the same 25 acres their whole life. They've just owned this vineyard forever. They know each vine, they know each block, they know each specificity of each side of the vineyard. So that was just very fascinating.
I'm curious, as your studies continued and you had that kind of real world, I've been in the vineyard, versus kind of this more scientific studies, tell me about how they balanced for you, and how you kind of balanced the idea of sort of observation and instinct versus scientific and engineering.
I think they just complement themselves really well. It's working back in Burgundy, I was just using my scientific knowledge to understand why they were doing things the way they were doing, and sometimes I would just find like, it doesn't really make logical sense for them to be doing it, but yet it seems to be working. And so I would never dare say anything, as them just being much older, I was never just going to bring it up, well, it's cool, we didn't just learn to do it this way. That being said, coming to Oregon in a much younger vineyard, where people don't know necessarily the vineyard as much, or just have a lot of newer plantation, new site, new vineyard, just 3-year-old vine, this is where just the science comes in. This is where just the education just is very useful, very important. And same thing goes into winemaking, I find. Just anyone can make wine. Like it's not like being a doctor. You can just go and just start operating on someone, but you can just go and just start making wine. And we see that every day, people who didn't study wine, who end up being winemakers. And there's nothing wrong about it. Anyone can make wine, anyone can make great wines. But then when there is a problem, when there's something that requires a more scientific understanding of why there's a problem, that's where I think there's a difference between people who got educated in it and not. And same goes to vineyard. It's just like, it's when you don't know anything, you don't have any background on that vineyard, that you just need to start just using your knowledge and not so much your observation skills.
So for you, tell me about when you come to a new vineyard, whether it's in Oregon or elsewhere, tell me about the process for you of getting to know a vineyard, and how long until you feel comfortable kind of knowing your terroir.
there's some vineyards I've been comfortable just within a year of just because everything just like the vineyard just looked just very standard. You just kind of see something very homogeneous. Just the vigor is like as long as everything seems average in a good way. Like nothing too vigorous, nothing just too thin, too small, just too struggling. I get just comfortable fairly quickly. Just knowing that we'll make a decent wine, not necessarily just making the best wine, but just making something that is going to be good. When vineyards are very non-homogeneous, when you have some very struggling parts, some part that have been neglected, that's just when it takes a while. There's some vineyards we've been working with for 5-6 years, and there's just some blocks we just don't know. We don't know just why they're behaving that way. And I'm sure if we were just digging entirely and just going and just doing a bunch of analyses, we'll figure it out. But just observing it is just not enough.
So we talked about your education process. Tell me about, for you, how far did the education process go, and what came next?
I got just the equivalent of a bachelor in science. So that was math, physics, chemistry, biology. And after that, did the engineering school, which the first year was just very, very large, just agriculture. I did a lot of animal husbandry and all that, which I just could not bear. Just knowing how to feed dairy cows just was boring me so much. It was just very, very hard. As soon as we were starting just to talk about apple trees or cherry trees, I was like, yes, please give me some plants. Just no cows, no goat, no foie gras. Just that was a big thing in Bordeaux. Just knowing how to feed just ducks for foie gras. It's like great, loving to learn that, but just like 25 hours of it is way too much. No, I just can't do that. Anyway, still had to pass them to be able to go to the next step. So ended up not necessarily just mastering them really, but I was very focused. I wanted to grow grapes, make wine, and learn everything about just winemaking and vineyard growing. So I just did a master's, both in viticulture and winemaking. And right after that, I wanted to go and do an internship abroad. So the great things about just that education in France is they force you to do internship throughout. So I was able to do harvest through my 5 years of education and see also different part of different season. Also, they just make sure that you hit a little bit of all of the seasons. I did one harvest in Bordeaux, but that was just because of logistic. I made a point of going back to Burgundy every year, which was not pleasing my teachers so much, being all from Bordeaux. They were just all realistic. Like, you have the opportunity to go to all these nice chateaux in Bordeaux. Why do you go back to Burgundy? It's like, why wouldn't I? I've always thought I had one focus. That was not only making wine, but I wanted to make Pinot and Chardonnay. And I thought if you had asked me that 15 years ago, I thought I was going to be making wine in Burgundy, living in Burgundy, dying in Burgundy, and that was just it. There was just no other option. I could not fathom any other places just to live. So I was not going to waste time just trying to make cab, trying to discover anything about Sauvignon Blanc or anything, just like regardless of what my teacher would say. And here I am making some cab and Riesling and just not always, a little bit, and definitely not in Burgundy, but just almost. So after college, just did an internship here. I wanted to go to a place that was making Pinot Noir, and that was English speaking. I just wanted to get one stab at just working in an English speaking place. I've never worked abroad, so that was the occasion. And some friend of mine in Burgundy just suggested to come here. He had been to the IPNC, really loved Oregon, just said, just check out Oregon. I know a guy there who makes wine. I have his contact, I can call him, and I was my kid, so I'd Beaufrère. So I came here in 2008.
A pretty interesting first place to land in Oregon.
Yes.
Tell us about that.
It was so first time in the US. It was great. So I have to say, I only have good memories of it, but yeah, it was a little strange. And I was living at their place, so just that first week, just living in some other people's place. I didn't really know them. I spoke English, but just like it took me a little while to adjust. Mike is crazy in a good way, but still crazy. Jackie's late life wife was the same, super nice, and I think she was so happy to have another woman in the house, having raised 3 boys. She was just like, she was so sweet to me, but in a little bit of a crazy way too. It just, but at the same time, I knew I was coming in the US, and I'm going to be judgmental here, but just coming from France, I was like, Americans are a little crazy, so I need to expect a little bit of craziness. And I was back in the days when we didn't have at least I didn't have a smartphone. You couldn't just call France that easily, so I was in very limited communication with my parents. So that was just also terrifying them. I was so tired that first week, having to adapt to living a new life, living with a new family. Like, they took me in just like I was their daughter, which was awesome. But it was just very strange,
What were the biggest, in wine terms or in vineyard terms, what were the biggest like cultural differences for you? What was different about Oregon wine versus where you had been before?
The attention to cleanliness. I was not used to have to clean things so much all the time, to take pumps apart, hoses apart. I had to take hoses apart every night and put them back together every morning. Every places that worked in France, they didn't even have hot water in the cellar. That's just, I was rinsing it, putting it back on the wall. We only had 1 pump that was just for pump over. Everything else was done by gravity, by lifting a forklift, moving, like not even with high tech. So that was more, and not that Beaufort is high tech by any means, but it's definitely more thought out. It's not just like put together by decades or centuries of just stuff built on top of each other. So yeah, the cleanliness and everything had to be so perfect. I was not used to it. And then just the hospitality side of things. It was just also very strange just to see tasting room, to have people coming and just pay to taste wine. I was like, what are they doing? Why do they just, $20 to taste just, I didn't know what it was. I grew up just going tasting wine in cellars, and you would just taste with a winemaker in the barrel room, just out of barrels. You didn't just open wine and having someone in hospitality person pouring wine for you. So that was just, definitely that first time I went to a tasting room, I was like, oh, that is different. It was just, a little different. And other than that, I think that's why I liked it so much. It just felt very similar in the attention that they were putting into the vineyard. They were just everything was done for a purpose. And frankly, what shocked me is the amount of science that people were just putting into everything. I remember the first time someone told me why we're putting citric in KMBS to rinse equipment. It's like, well, you want to lower the pH because the KMBS is more effective. And I was like, that is a lot of thought put into just cleaning a hose. Like, it was just a little too much for me. Like, everything was just done for such a detail, like such a level of detail, that I was just, I was surprised. There's a lot less room for empiricism, for sure. And I do find, I'm still just amused sometimes just to hear people in the wine industry who, when you taste, when you make the wine, who have just to put so much science into what they do, and just, I feel like they don't, so the words are always so complicated. Just they try to pinpoint exactly to have the perfect term, or as opposed to just, I don't know, being a bit more casual about it.
Interesting.
And there's a big difference when we taste. So at the winery, we're 4 winemakers, 3 of us are French. And we often, when we taste with other winemakers who just, are so, they think so much about everything, and we just look at each other, it's like, why is he spending so much time thinking about that? It's just, I do not know. It's just like, there's, I don't know, not that you shouldn't be serious about what you're doing, but there's a moment when there's just, it's too intellectual. There's just like, it's wine. You got to live it, you got just to, you make it, you live it, you drink it, just, you don't just stress about it.
You seem to have a very a well-honed instinct for that. Maybe that's something that the French have that we don't have yet.
Yeah, maybe. Or just, I think in general we tend to be less technical, which is not always a good thing. I'm not saying that's how we should be, but it's definitely a cultural difference. You go and talk to winemakers, a lot of time they won't know the specific of what they're doing, and they're just doing it because it works to make their wine. No need just to see how often do you gas your barrels, or how long do you leave your barrel on ozone to rinse it. It's just like there's so much just thought put into every little thing.
Interesting. So I'm curious about other memories from that year, and at that point, did you want to come back to Oregon when you were finished?
So I was just here for 8 weeks, and 2 weeks before the end of my internship, I told Mike, it's like, Mike, I really like it here. Do you think anyone would be looking for someone? And he was like, well, let's just see. I might just talk to a few people. And he took me to Salud, which was back in the days at Domaine Drouin. That was that big tasting. And you know how it is. It's crazy. All the winemakers are there. There's a lot of people. And first he introduced me to Véronique Drouin. And he was like, Véronique, just there and I talked to her, and she's like, well, Laurent is here and he's looking for an assistant winemaker for his next project. Just, do you mind talking to him? And Laurent was like, well, can you meet tomorrow at the winery that was the Northwest Wine at 9 o'clock? I was like, yes, my flight leaving on Sunday, so the day after, I'll come. And we had a quick interview, and he was like, yeah, we called just the immigration company that we use for interns, and Laurie was like, yeah, you just need to go back to France and just sort out the documents and you should be able to come back. And Laura was just come back when you can get a visa, which took a couple of months. And I was here in January 2009, started for Selena. I was the assistant winemaker for Selena and Grand Cru Estates at the time, so that was the new facility he had built in Yamhill.
So what about the first 6 weeks or so of your work here made you want to stay, or made you want to come back, or and change your plans?
Hard to pinpoint. There's like an atmosphere in the wine industry. Like, people were so enthusiastic. Like, I could feel the enthusiasm. Just like at the time, there was pre-harvest party everywhere. People knew each other, and Burgundy is great, and people are really nice, but they don't necessarily just cohabit that much. You know what? They've been just there their whole life. They don't necessarily know their neighbors, or they do, but they don't hang out with them. The wine industry is not as much of a community because it's a large part of just people. So when here, it's a smaller group of people, and just people like to gather and drink wine, talk about wine, just talk about food. And I'm gonna sound like an old person, but 12 years ago, 13 years ago, things were very different. Things were that much smaller. People even knew each other that much more. And I feel like, I was surprised to see the community, and just, I loved it. Just seeing all these people are just starting, a lot of people had not been there for that long. I was even told by Mike that just most Oregonian are not from Oregon. And I discovered that, yes, it is true. It's just like, it is a legitimate question to say, oh, where are you from? And most of the time, it's not going to be from around here. And I love that about it. And plus, fall in Oregon, it's hard not to love it.
So at that point, you got hired at Selena. So tell me about, actually, before we get to that, tell me about your impressions of Oregon wine once you first had it. What were your impressions of the wines that you first had, and of the people you met who were making them?
The wines were really different. It took me a while to get used to them. I was not used to higher alcohol Pinots. At that time, Burgundy was still producing just 12.5%. 13 was kind of a rare occurrence. And everything seems just a lot warmer, a lot darker, just dark fruit. I was missing the acidity, and especially working at Beaufrère, Mike just tends to like just riper fruit, lower acidity wine. So it was a different profile. As much as I fell in love with the region, the wine was not just like the main thing is like, oh, the wine is so good, that's what I want to do here. But I guess it was not that important to me. It's just the making of the wine is more important than the drinking of the wine somehow. And I know it sounds a little sad. I like drinking wine, but I'm more fascinated by the making of it, the process, than just actually the drinking. That's why we have customers. They're the one interested in the drinking of it.
So up to this point, you had been kind of more focused on the viticulture part of things and less on the winemaking. So you accepted a job as an assistant winemaker. Tell me about what that role was, and was it something you wanted to pursue at that point, or were you still hoping to get back to be more of in the viticulture?
So I was very into viticulture until college, when I realized that there is more position as a woman just in winemaking than there is in viticulture. especially in France. It was going to be a hard thing just to be able to have a high level position in the vineyard. It's just still not that common. When just in winemaking, it's a lot easier. So I shifted a little bit my view on things, just knowing that once I'm in the winery, I can still just do some viticulture, or just if it's a winery small enough, I'll be able to do both. So I did just a few harvests. I did enough just cellar work that I was just very comfortable just making wine. I mean, making wine. I was still not a winemaker, but I was comfortable working in the cellar, and I knew too that and especially here, vineyard work is not like in France. It's a small winery in France. The owner will be doing the vineyard work. Here, not so much. You just have workers who do the vineyard work. So, and I miss it, but I don't miss it at the same. In 2011, I went back to France for a year for visa reason, and I went back to work for my friends. And I was spending 80% of my time in the vineyard, 20 in the cellar, just to do small tasks throughout the week, throughout the year. And that comes from the fact that I love vineyard work, but it's hard work, and I don't know if I could do that years in and year out. And it's just like, it's wearing just doing that. I was young, just like doing that late in life might just have been a lot harder. So, I mean, I knew it was going to be just, it was very likely that I was going to end up just working in the cellar. So starting working for Selena, it was very slow at first. The winery was still being built when I arrived. So we had about 80, 90 barrels at the time. So I was just doing topping, doing analysis, inputting everything into a new database. So a lot of just paperwork. And Laurent just gave me the task of visiting all the vineyards we were just buying fruit from, which at the time was a lot. I had to design, just to make sure I had maps from all the growers who were just buying, and just directions. So I had just to make a binder, so anyone in the company could just grab the binder and just go and visit a vineyard. So that allowed me to visit all 50 vineyards in the Willamette Valley, which was awesome. My first year here, I just drove everywhere. Had the map of the vineyard, would just walk the rows, and just got familiar with just so many vineyards. That was definitely amazing.
So tell me about the as you grew into that position, and as Selena grew. Tell me about the style of wine that you were making, and the kind of the philosophy behind it for you. The kind of winemaking philosophy. Was it something that you had developed, or was it mostly coming from Laurent, and kind of what was your philosophy like at that point?
That was both. So Laurent, I went through the same school as Laurent, so we were just trained just in a very similar manners, which is intervene when you have to, don't if you don't have to. And fortunately, the first couple of years I was working for Laurent was 2009 and 2010, which were fairly easy vintages. 9 was a little late, but really ripe. 10 was a little later, but still just really nice. No real challenge to have. And he's really big into making sure that just the picking decision is the most important thing. So once you pick at the right time, then there's really not that much to do afterward. And we didn't have, and that's something I was used to before in France, and something that he also does, is like we didn't have a strict protocol for winemaking. Like we don't have, to this day we have clients who ask us, hey, do you have a protocol for winemaking? We don't. We have general ideas of how we want to do things, but it really depends on the batch, on the vineyard, we have just to see the wine. And one thing that I wasn't used to, and that he's very adamant on, is just tasting fermenters every day. Every fermenter is tasted every day. And that's a lot of work, just pulling samples, but at the same time we know each fermenters, we know where the wine is going, and we make decisions based on how we taste. So there is no two fermenters is treated the same way. We just make decision on what type of extraction we're going to do, how long the extraction, how often do we skip, when do we press, like everything is just based on how the wine tastes, and not so much on how we want to make the wine. And that's awesome, interesting in the winemaking perspective. That goes back to what I was saying about just feeling the wine, and not so much about just knowing and imposing just the way we want to make the wine. Same thing with anything else, like acid correction, anything. We look at numbers, and then when the numbers are a little bit out of range, that's when we're just like, okay, we need to do something. If not, just like, well, it's a little high, but let's just ride with it and we'll see. a little passive, but it's mostly just what, we make fun of French people when they say, French coopers when they say that their barrels respect the fruit. They always say that it's like, oh, our barrels is great, it's there and it's respecting the fruit. But that's exactly what we're doing. It's like the fruit's coming, it's there, the guys did a great job in the vineyard, now let's just try to see what we can do with it without just changing it too much. Now that being said, difficult vintages like 13 or 11 when they need a bit more work, well then we intervene when we have to.
I want to ask you were mentioning 2009 and 10 as your first vintages, and then of course 2011 is kind of legendarily difficult vintage. Tell me about that one from your perspective. What did you have to do with that vintage that was different? What did you kind of learn from 2011?
So 11 was just a nice vintage because I was in Burgundy that year. I came back in 12 though and had to deal with 11 because I came back working for Laurent Northwest Wine Company, and my other colleague I've left, so I was just new and left. No one was there, just like a little bit of a staff change then, and I was like, what is that? It's like the acid was up the roof. I came and their ML was not finished, like a lot of lot were just a little underripe. I mean, just like everyone in 11, we were just struggling, just a lot of reduction issues. It was cold, and things just definitely was not the best vintage to be landing back to Oregon for. But Laurent was just like, well, let's just see how we can help the wine, just set up a bunch of trial, and then we'll see how it goes. And eventually, we managed to mitigate a little bit just that lack of ripeness, and we had some great vineyards to work with, and on some other vineyards like Highland, we embraced that acidity, and it took a long time for the wine to be ready to be drunk, but once it was great.
So you mentioned that you'd left and you came back, and now you're working at Northwest Wines. So how had your role changed in the kind of the interim there from when you left to go back to Burgundy and came back?
Well, just the size of the facility. I left Selena and we were making almost 300 tons at a time, and came back at 1,800 tons for Northwest. I was coming back from a friend's winery and we're making 80 tons in Burgundy, and that first vintage was very stressful. And again, because there was just not any continuity between the previous cellar staff and me, and I had just my colleague who was just the assistant winemaker here at the time. So I came back as an assistant winemaker as well, and she quit because she just had the baby, and so I was just like first harvest, big facility. It was stressful. And then it worked. Like Laurent and Robert were just working on the sorting line just during harvest, and I was just managing more of the lab and just distributing the work to the interns. Had to hire my first interns too. That was different. I was still really young and just trying to interview people. It's just like I don't know what I'm doing. Interviewing just by internet because they were international, and so I mostly interned just French that year. It's like, yep, you're French, you're coming in. I can't really deal with too many people not speaking the language. It was just like, nope. And it worked out great. It just, again, it was a lot of work. I just finishing at midnight every day, and just, I only have just good memories of it. And then when harvest was over, it was just, Laurent was like, wow, do you want to be a winemaker? And it's like, yeah, I'll just do it. It was just, there was so much to learn. Going from a small place to a big place, just all filters I had never used before and all that, just,
we obviously, we interviewed Brian last week, and he talked about sort of a similar situation for him. Tell me about that learning curve for you of getting used to a facility of this size and kind of the logistics of all the different things that are going on here.
Yeah. So the difference between Brian and I is I started when Northwest was still not as big as it was. He came just 5 years later, and by that point we had grown like threefold. So when I started, we didn't have nearly as many tanks as we do now, and I didn't really ask myself much question. There's like, we have plenty of wine, we need to bottle them, we're gonna need to filter them, and we're filtering overnight and during the weekend and all that. It's like it had to be done. And I'm really logistic minded, and that's just really when it kicked in. I didn't realize that I was just that interested into just making things just work smoothly until I had to. And that's one thing I just still pride myself in, is just being organized enough to be able just to run a big show without just having to work too hard. We never had to work 24 hours. We don't do two shifts. We still just work like almost we work less than small wineries. I was doing more hours at Beaufrere than I'm doing here, but it's just a matter of just being organized and putting people in the right place and just having more process in place and making sure, that everyone is trained correctly and at the right place. And I get along really well with just the vineyard management team. And it's a matter of also just planting the fruit, just being always in constant communication. Like Bruno and I, we text and call each other during a harvest maybe 30 times a day. It's first thing he does in the morning, he calls me on his way in, and I call him and he's like, okay, when do you want the first fruit? How much can you take today? And then if clients send some wines and some grapes and they're like, hey Bruno, can you cancel that pick tonight because we didn't get, the press is broken. So it's all that, and it's a well-oiled machine. It's just because we managed to communicate and we're just organized and we've worked together for a long time.
So you talked about the growth of Northwest Wine since you've been here, obviously a huge producer now of Oregon wine. Tell me about the work with the kind of the outside clients. How does that work for you, and how do you balance sort of everyone's needs simultaneously?
So luckily a lot of our small clients are just vineyard owners and brand owners. So they own a vineyard, but we manage the vineyard. So we make all the decisions from picking to winemaking until it's in bottle pretty much. And of course they intervene just in the style of wine they want, the blends they want and all that, but we have a lot of room. So that allows us to make decisions and not have just to wait on them to make decisions. A couple of other clients are just bigger, or just they have their own winemakers, and it's an adjustment just to have to deal with people's style of winemaking. It doesn't necessarily match what we're doing, and we have just the extremes. So we have some people who just don't want to do anything to their wine. You don't add anything. You just do pump overs twice a day and that's it. Like you never add anything. And the other extreme, when you just add everything on this planet that exists just to at the end, and that's just the beauty of it, is being able just to work with other people and just knowing at the end that we're doing the right thing because we're not being too crazy about anything. Because at the end, their wines are equally good. It's just like different style, but they're all making a good wine, except that just they decide to take very opposite approach. So we're definitely learning from clients. Like there's a good things in all approaches. But ours is better. because it fits what we want to do, it's just like you have to just to make sure that it works with just everything in your winery.
We talked about Laurent and Bruno, kind of the mentors here. Tell me about the relationship with them and getting that kind of working relationship where you get to the point where you're cohesive, like you talked about. What are their styles like, and how do they coincide with your style?
Bruno is very picky and nitpicky about everything. It's funny, just because he makes wine also for himself now, he wants to do so many trials every time. Every time. Like I know now, before we bottle his wine, like I need to warn him a month ahead. It's like, hey, we're going to bottle your wine. What do you want to try? And we try everything. And every single time is to finish just saying, oh no, I don't want to do anything. It's like, well, we still have to try. It's like, well, yeah, but after 6 years, Bruno, you should know that we tried everything. We're not going to add anything. So, okay, but why not? I mean, he likes just to have all the options, just to make sure he's making the right decision. But he's very detail-oriented, and he's an amazing taster. Anytime just we have something that is not conclusive, or Brian and I can't agree on something, we just call Bruno. It's like, Bruno, can you please be the tiebreaker? And it's just, because he has an amazing palate. He knows what he likes, he knows what he wants. His brain goes into all kind of direction, but we get along just great together. Laurent is just very different. He's just more just like, hey, if you want to take that off my plate, I'll let you. and I think that's why it was stressful, but at the same time, why I liked it so much working for him is because I had so much leeway. As long as I was not making any mistake, he was just like, do the things the way you want. But he never really said it out loud. He would just not give me any direction. It was just like nothing. And then one year, that was maybe a couple of years after I started, and I was like, hey Laurent, do you mind just approving the barrel ordering? We need to review what we need to do this year. It's like, oh, you can do it. You've been doing it for 2 years. Just go ahead. And it's like, what, do you want to review the budget? It's like, no, just go ahead. It's like, oh, okay. So it was just like very, very trusting. And again, just as long as you don't let him down, it's just like you go for it. And winemaking was the same. As long as the wine was tasting fine, he insisted on tasting everything. But if it was happy with it, that was it. There's no detail. He did not want to know the detail. It's just like, at no point was just like, oh, I wanted to filter this first and then second. I'd like to try this or that. It's like, oh no, just you do it. Just show me the result. If I don't like it, I'll let you know. So that was just pretty amazing. I don't know if it was because he was ready to let it go, or if he was just like, hey, at least one less thing I have to think about. Just like someone is doing it for me. That's fine.
That's an interesting pair. I'm an interesting pair for you to learn from.
Oh yeah, but you know how much you learn from just having someone just over you constantly just questioning why you're doing something. I mean, it was just pretty amazing. It's I'm very independent, but at the same time I know my limits. So anytime I had just a doubt on what to do, I would ask him or just ask Bruno, and they'd just always be there just to guide me. But definitely Laurent and more just like, hey, sure. I mean, you know as much as I do, just go for it. Yeah.
Tell me about the evolution of your role then, since you came back, since you've been at Northwest Wine. Have you been doing basically what you're doing now from the start, or has your role changed here?
I mean, just taking more and more responsibilities, just having a more direct contact with clients now than I was at the beginning. It used to go 100% through Laurent, and now it's just like I deal with them just more directly. Same thing with just suppliers and all that. Just like small detail that I just took more ownership on. Being a bit more involved on the cost and the budget part of it, which is not particularly something I care much for, but it's a necessity, so I get it. And then just also just being more able just to represent the companies just outside, just doing more in-tasting events and pouring events, or just doing interviews with journalists and all that. Just obviously something I didn't do at the beginning, and I'm doing more now. I'm not the best person to talk about wine, so I was really not that disappointed when I couldn't taste with a wine writer or anything. It's like just I'd rather be left alone, but it's kind of the necessity of the job now. So
I can appreciate that.
It's funny because my husband is always just telling me, it's just like, you like just to be around people. It's like, I might like to be around people, but I'm not a talker. I'm not a people person. Like, I don't just necessarily need just to talk to them about wine. And I hate just having to talk about wine. Again, it's just like, you drink it, you like it, you don't like it. I really don't mind if you don't tell me why, or just I can direct you. But I don't want just to describe a wine or ask me a technical question. I'll answer as much as you want. But writing tasting notes, Brian knows about it, because every time we've asked to write tasting notes, like, here you go, Brian. Couldn't care less if it smells like pear or white flower. It's just really not that important to me.
You mentioned one of the responsibilities that you've kind of grown into is working more with the clients directly. I'm curious, you have a lot of different, like you mentioned, a lot of different clients coming from a lot of different backgrounds with a lot of different kind of expectations. Tell me about managing those expectations and about producing a quality product for all of those different...
All of them?
All of them.
I mean, it's very important to understand what they like, and it really depends again on the client. The small clients who have their small tasting room and they're selling the wine direct and they do it themselves, they need a lot more guidance, they need a lot more support, and so that I love just talking to them about just the different blends we're making for them, trying to understand what works for their customers, what doesn't, what they like, what they don't like. Because some customers, some of our clients, you realize that they like cab, but yet we're making Pinot for them. And it's like, okay, well, we need to change a bit the style of how we make the wine for you guys. The bigger customers, is just making sure we're doing what they want to do, and that just at the end of the day that we're following their protocol, and reassuring them that yes, we're following their protocol. Yes, we might just frown upon it sometimes, just saying like, are you sure you want us to do that? But okay. We have really good relationship with them. I do like to tease a couple of them because I will question it. It's just like sometimes it's just whatever they want to do seems a little crazy. So I really want to push and understand why they want to do it. But that doesn't mean we won't do it. I'll do it. Just no problem. I'm just want to know why.
Are there limits to that for you in terms of how much you will or won't do for a client?
No. It's wine. There's nothing illegal. There's nothing, it's just like, if they want to add 5 grams of acid in their wine, it's their choice. They're professional. That's what they want. If they want to add acid, remove acid, add acid, remove acid in the same wine several times throughout the vintage, it is totally fine. It's like, no, there's no limit. We just don't put our foot down. It's like, it's their wine, their decision.
When it comes to the wine you're producing for the Northwest Wine Company labels, for your own labels, tell me what your kind of the ideal wine is for you. What is the style you're going for here, and what is it that you're portraying in the Selena and the Westmount and those types of brands?
It really depends on the brand. We definitely have different identities, different just public that we're just trying to custom the wine for. Westmount, we're just going for a serious wine, but just really easy to drink. Something that is really Willamette Valley, so fresh, aromatic, but pleasant. Something that you can just pour at in any occasion, but at the same time not take too seriously. Like it's Selena is just definitely its own style. It's a lot bigger, darker. It's a bigger wine. I don't want to set the image of Laurent, but it's definitely just like something that is richer. It's more generous. That's Laurent's style. He likes just something that is lush is not a good word, but just a bigger, richer style in general. Highland, I find it's a lot more restrained. I would say it's probably more my style. Like I just put up more of my personality in making Highland, more acid-driven wine, a little bit more delicate in the sense that I don't mind if the wine is underwhelming at first. I just want elegance first. It takes a bit more time, but I think it's okay. It's a different type of public that drinks it. And then we have just several other brands like Kudos, some lower price brands. And in these wines, it just needs to be a good wine. We just want to have fruit, to have the proper structure, to make sure that people won't complain about anything. That it tastes like Oregon, it tastes like Pinot, and that's really all we're going for. And vintage identity too. It's something we've been struggling with. Making sure we keep the identity of the vintage, but at the same time understanding that people won't understand it. It's hard because we don't sell the wines directly. It goes to big distributors everywhere. It's just I think we distribute in 48 states. So we don't know what people think. And reading the comments sometimes, something you should never do. Do not go read comments people leaving on websites about your wine. It is terrible. And sometimes it's like, oh, they really did not like that wine. But then I just realized, like, well, they probably don't like Pinot, or they just want something different. And it's fine, but it's harsh. It's hard just to try to please everyone. But that's what we're trying to do, just trying to please everyone.
You talked about for your own personal palate that Oregon wines are an adjustment for you. So tell me about, has your palate adjusted to Oregon wine, or have you started kind of adjusting the Oregon wines more to fit what you want to do?
No, I adjusted to Oregon wine. I'm definitely going back to tasting back some Burgundy wine. Now I just find them just to be bright and just to be honest, I love to drink wine, but only when I eat. So I don't really drink a glass of red wine by itself, and that's something that you can't do with Burgundy wine. Like it's very just unpleasant to drink a Pinot from Burgundy just by the glass. And when here I've just been learning to enjoy just a Pinot by itself. I still don't really do it that much, but it was not just all about just finding the right balance. I don't like all Pinots from Oregon. I still just like a Pinot just to be a little bit lower in alcohol, and I mean not lower, but just like the 14.5, 15% that sometimes are put out is just way too much. I like them to be more delicate, more fruit driven. But no, I most definitely adapted to them. I've not warmed up to Pinot Gris. That's only the one thing, still not a thing. Just we make a lot of it, but yeah, won't drink it anytime soon.
Well, and you mentioned that Pinot Noir and Chardonnay were the things that really drew you, but now you're making other things. So tell me about that too, about working with Riesling and Cab and Pinot Gris and other things like that.
Pinot Gris was just a novelty. I didn't know what it was, and it's a different way of making the wine just because of the color the skin has. So yeah, it took me a couple of years to understand just fully how to do it. But at the same time, it's a very forgiving grape. So when you know how to make Chardonnay, just you can make decent Pinot Gris, and then just you learn how to make it better. Riesling was an adjustment. First vintage with Riesling was 2012, and it's probably the worst Riesling just one has ever drank from Highland. It was yeah. I made just Riesling like I was making Chardonnay, which is a higher temperature, and yeah, did not turn out well. We did a blind tasting a couple of years ago of all the Riesling from Highland, and 12 was, yeah, noticeably worse. Noticeably, that was the least favorite of everyone, and it's like, yeah, I remember that. Never made Riesling in my life. Had a very vague idea of just how to make it, and you know, making white wine is making white wine, but not exactly. It had no flavor, did not taste like Riesling, which is very flabby, and just because I fermented too warm, did not think about it, did not think about putting the cooling on or anything. So yes, that was a little bit of an adjustment. It was a learning curve. I'm really proud of the Riesling now, which is making just, as soon as I realized my mistake, just which was after fermentation was over, it's like, oh yes, cool fermentation, now I know why. Makes sense. So yeah, Riesling, Gewürztraminer, just yeah, there's definitely a winemaking technique for each varietal. And that's really my fault. That's me just being so focused on making Chardonnay and Pinot that there was just really nothing else. Except for Cab. I've always liked Cab too, so I did pay close attention in school about how to make Cab and Merlot. That was still just something I was interested in. So I did follow the proper protocols just here, but yeah, white wine, it's so different. On any given year, we process 13 to 15 different varietals at the winery. The majority of it being Pinot, Pinot Gris, Chardonnay, Riesling. But then we have 3 tons of something, 2 tons of Viognier, a little bit of Muscat, a little bit of Sauvignon Blanc and all that. So yeah, it keeps you on your toes.
So I want to talk about 2020 a little bit, because obviously that was a pretty interesting year for everybody. Tell us, first of all, let's talk about the COVID, the pandemic. How did it affect you and your wine life, and how did you see it affect the industry?
Production side, it did not. Fortunately, so we were lucky enough to be considered essential worker, because we can't just stop making wine, and the vineyard does not stop growing just because of COVID. So we continued working. We changed our schedule a little bit, so everyone that could work remotely in the winery just was sent home. Winemaking team could not work remotely, so we were still on site, just a lot more spread out. Alternating schedule with anyone just in the same office would not work at the same time. Brian and I would just taste in opposite side of a room and all that. Just harvest was the hardest, just 4 of us tasting every day, and we had just to figure out where to taste, pulling samples twice instead of once because we couldn't taste in the same glasses and all that, when typically we share 1 glass, 4 winemakers. So that was just different logistic. The work itself, we're a big winery and only 7 employees, so it was easy just to keep people apart from each other and just to say, well, you're just going to be racking your barrels here and you're going to be just filtering over there, just making sure people were just staying more apart than usual. What was hard was the lack of social interaction, and of course it was hard for anyone, but we love to cook at the winery. We always have lunch at some point. We always end up gathering, just having a glass of wine, doing something, which we didn't do, obviously. And then when the harvest came, that was just definitely the worry was just someone would get sick, we would have to just shut down. Something would happen in the middle of harvest. So we just set up just different protocols. We came up with a team concept. So we bought a bunch of vests, just the high-vis vest, but different color. And we're just grouping people by pods, just saying like, you're allowed just to hang out with your pod, have lunch with your pod, just do things just together. Making sure that just there was no crossover, but that each pod was replaceable by another one if one had to be taken out somehow. Just some cross training here and there. And it worked out fine. We did have to interrupt production a little bit at the end of harvest. Unfortunately, an intern just came down with COVID, and we had to send everyone home really, because that was at the end when people were a bit more relaxed. So we were not sure exactly of how the pod had been working and how. So that was just left. Bruno, Laurent, and I were the only one left at the winery. So Laurent dug a tank as I was pressing it, and we worked in the cellar, just the two of us, for a couple of days. It was just a little surreal. I remember just calling Laurent. It's like, Laurent, you ready to dig out a tank of cab? It was Selena's cab. He's like, well, sure. It's like, we couldn't just let it sit. We didn't know we were going to be shut for 10 days. We couldn't just stop everything. So, yeah, he and I.
Amazing.
That was, it was fun. Just, just that surreal thing. It's night, and you just, the two of us just working in the press. Bruno just walking, looking at us at a distance, just like saying, you guys, just what are you doing? It's like, well, we don't have any interns, no employees. Everyone's been sent home, and our tests came back negative. We know we were not in contact with that intern, so we could work, and yeah. So it was challenging, but in a good way somehow. It forced us to revisit some protocols and to come up with new concepts and all that.
But for the industry in general, I know obviously during harvest especially, you're pretty focused on what you're doing here, but what did you sense from the industry as they were dealing with COVID and kind of the reaction to it?
Well, there was a bit of a mixed bag in reaction, mostly on the hospitality side, obviously. Some people decided to never reopen their tasting room, and some people decided just that, hey, we're just gonna do curbside pickup, and we're just gonna work more online. And that's the approach that our team took. They just went all out and just trying just to sell wine, even though people could not taste. We definitely, just like anyone, just took on some habit of just doing Zoom tasting. Clients could not come. We just sent samples and taste through Zoom, which we still do because we don't really have visitors coming. So we changed definitely just the way we do things. We had to cancel all kind of wine events. OPC, the auction, all the Chardonnay technical tasting, like all the events that we have in the valley throughout the year had to be canceled, and then we ended up just doing a few online. I mean, it's a bit of a shame, but it's all gonna go back to normal. Like if we don't do Chardonnay technical tasting for 2 years, then that's fine. We're just gonna have that much more fun next time we have one. I mean, seriously, it's hard because we tend just to be a fairly tight-knit group and just to see each other all the time and talk to each other all the time, and we don't really anymore. I have a really close friend, a group of winemakers friends, they're just all women, and we just happened to meet one day, and we kept going, and we're just doing everything online. It's not as much fun, but it works. I feel bad for all these small wineries that just did not try to push their sales just outside of just their tasting room, because at the end it worked out. We've been able to sell wine just as much, if not more, than before, and just through all the effort that our team just put, and they went out there, they try to sell, they just cold call and all that. And if that's one thing that we all know, is people kept drinking during COVID, so
they were stuck at home with their families. Of course they kept drinking.
Yeah.
The other part of 2020 was the fires around harvest and the smoke around harvest. So tell me about that from your perspective, and how that affected your work.
Oh, we just changed it changed everything. It changed the whole harvest. COVID was going to be our biggest worry, and as soon as the smoke started, we knew that was going to be the next biggest worry. Knew nothing about smoke. Within 2 days of having that big, thick smoke everywhere, Laurent was just printing out just research documents from Australia and just everything that has been done, and we just started reading about it and starting putting together just plans of micro ferments and just trying to figure out, do we have a smoke issue? Are we just worried about it for no reason? And we realized really soon that we were going to have a smoke issue. ETS was backed up, so we did not have any chance just to start just testing it. So it was just perception, sorry. But then we quickly also decided that we're gonna pick no matter what. So we picked everything. We didn't drop. The only vineyard we didn't pick was just that vineyard that had insurance, and they were like, we'd rather take the insurance than just have to have issues later on. And Laurent was like, no, we're bringing the wine and we'll figure it out. Which was a little ballsy, but I just, I'm not saying it's paying off yet, but we're just going to be able to make a decent wine. Everything is affected. There's so much more work. Been doing so many trials. We decided also really on, I was just like, if we treat the wine, we need to do it as juice, because every time everyone was saying like, you will strip the wine if you do it later. And I have a lot of experience with dealing with affected fruit just really early in the season. So we knew like Pinot Gris, that has a lot of issue, even just when they come to the winery. And I knew that just treating them early just has a lot higher, there's a way better chance just to clean up the wine without just creating any damage to longer damage to the wine. So anyway, so we went for it. I just did some flotation on red wine, which is not something that everyone's like, it won't work. You can't float red wine. It's like, well, I just need to try, and it works. Just like cleaning up the wine early on, just lining up just tanks everywhere, treating with carbon and milk and all kind of things, just because I was like, I don't want to be left at the end of harvest realizing that, oh shoot, we just can't do anything anymore. I'd rather just try now and just see if it works. And it created just like 3 times the work. But I'm pretty happy with what we have now. We're still dealing with it, we're still just trying to clean up the wine right now, and but we'll make some good wine. Yeah.
In terms of sort of for the future for yourself, what have you learned from this, dealing with this kind of harvest? What are you going to be prepared for if it happens again?
Well, if it happens again, definitely know now which product, which dose, what to use early on. There's so little done in terms of research and publication, and that we just didn't really know how to deal with it. Like, we had a general idea, but that's it. Now I'm just way better documented, and just I know what to use, I know when to do it, and just to do early on. It's still, no matter what would be a challenge, I don't think just any event of smoke will be able just to clean it up and just do it in a more efficient way, but it's still just going to be an issue. I don't think we can remove the problem altogether. So it's probably just a bit less stress if that happens again, which might happen. Just this year we're already starting to see some little fires here and there in very dry weather in April, which is crazy.
Yeah, this is a very interesting April. There's no question about that.
Yeah, very strange. Like the first time I just heard just about just fires like a couple of days ago, it's like, is that April really? Like, we have a humidifier, what is called a hygrometer in our house, and just sitting at 32% in the house. Like, what is that? It's April. It's Oregon. It should be pouring rain right now.
So we talked about kind of your early impressions of the Oregon wine industry. What are the changes you've seen in the industry as you've been a part of it? What about the industry has changed, and where does it kind of stand today?
So in almost 15 years, the main difference that I've found, it's becoming less and less little mom and pop, just small vineyards, just some farmers that decided to start growing grapes just because people were starting growing grapes and they found that was a good opportunity. It's becoming more and more professional, for good and for bad. It's nice to have people who know what they're doing, but it was also nice just to help along just farmers just trying to figure out how to grow grapes. I thought that was just pretty nice, just visiting all this vineyard that I got a chance to visit. It was nice to talk to people, and they always had questions. They always wanted to show you their vineyards. Like, do you think we should do it this way or that way? Just like, they were so proud of it, of the accomplishment just of going from wheatgrass or just any kind of seed grass to vineyard. That was just a big change, as opposed to having bigger companies coming, knowing what they're doing and planting vineyard. There's a little bit less soul to it. That being said, it's still good no matter what. Just the industry is growing. We're just making more and more wine. Oregon's trying just to be more known. The quality of wine in general is improving just because it's being pulled from the top. A lot of people just coming from Washington and California, and same thing. It's just like, you can just frown a little bit just in California and moving in, but they know what they're doing, and it can only elevate the industry.
What about as you look ahead for Oregon wine? What is the industry going to look like in the coming years?
Well, definitely more Californians. As the fires are just settling in down there, it's just like we see them coming. We see a lot more requests from people just to to buy grapes and all that, which again, I don't see any issue. More French buying companies, that can only be good. But seriously, it's just like bringing a little bit of the old world, and they see the opportunity because there's so much to be done, but they're bringing the experience at the same time in a different approach to wine. Just since I've been here, Louis Jadot came, Jean-Nicolas Méo-Camusé, like all these just French winemakers just coming in and just bringing their experience. And it's not like they make necessarily better wine, but they make different wine. They're just exposing the industry to other ways. And I do like just that mixed culture. Oregon would not be interesting to me if there was not a little bit of French here and there. I like just that mix of ideas and that, and we're always arguing, like we like to do things a certain way, and then the Americans is like, why would you do it this way? It's like, it's because we want to and we know better. It's fun. So I just think that the industry would definitely gonna be seeing a lot more vineyards, a lot more mass production vineyard. There's gonna be probably a lot of cheaper wine from Oregon coming, which is not a bad thing either. Just one of the hard things right now is just Oregon wines are so expensive, so people don't get to know it. And at the same time, we're also going to see just a lot better wines, which is the high-end wines are going to explode. We'll see a lot more sparkling, I'm assuming, even though just the climate's getting a little warmer. But we're making more sparkling now, and it's been fun. And my dream would be to see a bit less Pinot Gris, but that's just me. Just other varietal, just different wine, different.
What about for you personally, as you look ahead for your future? What do you see for yourself, for your work here, and perhaps beyond?
I don't know. That's always a joke that I have with Robert, our general managers, because in France, when you go and start for a company, typically you will retire in that company. Like you work somewhere and you stay there, and that's kind of the attitude I have. I don't plan on doing anything else. I've been toying with the idea of just making my own wine, and it's like, do I really need to? I'm making just 250 wines here. Why do I need to make my own wine? I don't like to sell. I don't like to go around sell wine to people. So it's like, there's no reason for it. Just like I have the chance to make so many wines here. That's all I care about. So really, it's just my goal in life would be to be the next person to solve the smoke issue. That's just it's like if I can find an actual solution. No, but joking aside, just continuing improving just winemaking and taking one vintage at a time, and just maybe 1 year when I'm old enough, I won't really have just to be worried about anything. I'll just be like, bring me your next challenge, I'll make you great wine out of it.
That would be a cool business philosophy. I like that.
But at the same time, it's like, that's the thrill of harvest. Like, what are you going to have this year? Even an easy harvest is not an easy harvest, it's just like, you still need to make the wine. Like, I want just to be able to that would be great to know that every year I'm just gonna just hit it and just make 100-point wine. That's the thing. Just no matter what, give me anything, I'll make the most perfect wine. It's really not realistic. But I'll just, that would be my challenge, just working at it.
And what about the company here? What do you see in the future for Northwest Wine? What are your kind of plans or projects for the future?
Well, so we purchased a vineyard in Red Hill of Douglas County last year, which is 250 acres planted. So our next challenge is going to be just to make wine out of that vineyard. Just Bruno is working on just rehabilitating the vineyard. It's been a little abandoned for the past few years. We are just expanding. We're just gonna build a new extension to the winery next year and starting a little bit this fall and just adding 2,000 tons to what we're doing. So yeah, just the challenge would be just to be able to continue making wine and mostly just the great thing I like just about working here is just like, it's not because we're becoming bigger that we're just paying less attention. That's one I think is just important. I've been here for a long time now. It's just being able to keep adding to it and just knowing that you can keep adding wine. I'm still just going to be paying as much attention. It's never going to be mass production. We're still going to just be keeping it just like know each individual tank and just be close to it. And that's one thing that with our size, I find it's probably not that common in a lot of wineries is, as a winemaker, I still get to go and use the filter from time to time. When one of my guys is sick or can't make it, I'll just go and do it. Just like I'll go rack some barrels if I have to. I'm not saying it happens all the time. It rarely happens, but I still do it. And I want to make sure that I never stop doing it. I want to be able to move barrels when I have to. Because that's why I'm doing it. I like to do the job. Now I understand I can't do the job every day. I have just to also do more managing than just do actual work. And again, I can't complain. I love just doing it. I wouldn't want just to be working in the cellar every day or cleaning tank every day, but I want to make sure I still know how to do it. And that the guys see me doing it and that they know that I value the work, that it's not just about just giving them a list of stuff to do and that's it. And that's what I think just makes it's a big part of just working for Northwest. It's just like, every step and you're able to pick up a hose and rinse out a tank when you need to. And I'm hoping that as we're expanding our facility that we're still able to do it. That we never lose that focus. Like I know that I started working in the wine industry because I started just removing leaves on a vine, not because I just went to school and decided like, oh, I want to make wine, like that's going to be my next thing. It's just like just doing the work and just still knowing how to do it. And that's just bringing back to that week of harvest last year where we didn't have anyone, just seeing Laurent just jumping into a tank, grabbing a shovel and shoveling a tank. And he did it in such a short time because I was timing him. We were just making sure it was just, he had a record to beat. And I was like, oh my gosh, you did it in just like half the time that any of my 20-year-old intern who will complain about how sore their back is after. And just like, you can still do it. Just driving a forklift, dumping food in the, just like all these little things, just like never forgetting about it.
And you took video of this, I hope, for the archives.
I could not. I was just driving the forklift. Can't drive and text. You know that. No, I had a picture of his boots in the tank, just looking at it.
That's fantastic. So one last question for you. We're going to go a little philosophical for you here. What is the role of wine in society?
Oh, I know I've told myself that's like, what if one day there's no more wine? What would I do? I don't know. I mean, coming from the old world, just like wine has its place, just like on the table, just like bread has its place on the table. It's part of history. It's been through millennia, people have been drinking wine, and I don't care much for the intoxicating part of the wine. I wish personally that there was no alcohol. If I could, I would have wine without alcohol. It's just the culture behind it, and I don't think people just understand it as much here, how important wine is, until you're in Europe and it's everywhere and you drink it and you have it on your table and you're 10-year-old and your dad's just giving you a little bit of wine. It's like, hey, do you want to taste? And never making it a big deal, but always making it a big deal at the same time. It's like you have to have wine. You can't just not have a family dinner without wine. But at the same time, it's just like, well, let's not drink until we just can't taste anymore. It's just like it's all in moderation, and each wine has its story. Even if you just buy the €2 bottle at the store, it's just like you just know which region it's from. It has a different taste. It's like there's so much science, so much history, so much memories just behind wine that just I don't know. I never really thought that much about it, except that thought crossed my mind just recently because of that bill that they were just trying to pass in Oregon. It's like, what if there was no more wine? It's just like, what would we do? So yeah, hopefully we won't get to that point.
Hopefully.
Yeah,
Hopefully.
I'll ferment anything otherwise. Rhubarb, anything, I'll just make wine. Oh, and another thing, just, and I know it's being a little picky, but just, yeah, for me, wine is only from grapes, and just like, and it's a really big thing, just, I don't know, there's something about just the history of fermenting grapes that just other fruit don't have, really. I'm sure some culture would just disagree, but at least just there's grapes all around the world, and there's I don't know, there's something special about it. But at the same time, I don't think wine has ever been the origin of a war or anything. It's just it's not one of these products.
It's a fair point. I like that. So the questions that I have for you, is there
I thought
anything
that was the last question.
is there anything anything I didn't ask that I should have, anything we didn't cover here today that we should have covered?
No, I feel like I've probably talked a lot about my whole life. Yeah, you know everything now. I didn't hide anything, so no, nothing really.
Thank you so much. We really
You're
appreciate
welcome.
it. Appreciate your time and your stories and your candor. And
You're
this
welcome.
beautiful day.
I was getting a little cold at the end, but yeah.
Glad we survived through. So thank you so
We did.
much.
Oh, you're welcome.
Go ahead and let you off the hook.